Bruchim Aboim B'Shem Hashem. B'Shem Irgun Shaitar, I'd like to welcome everyone to today's shir from Harav Yaakov Zasmith Shlita on when is water a Chatzitza for Netilas Yodayim. I'd like to be Yashakayach to Rabbi Elisha Halland for sponsoring today's shir in Nishmas Oviv, Mordechai Ben Elisha Akain, V'Shalom Alin Nishmas Imo Yigitol Leah Basar B'Chaim Yisrael Allah Shalom. I've got sponsoring a shir call Irgun Shaitar 718-851-8651 or email ist@yeshivanet.com. Harav Smith.
I always wanted to go through the sugya, which is again, every time we wash, you see some people when they come to wash, they first dry their hands, many water on it, they dry the keli, they dry the faucet. I heard some people are makbid, they dry the paper towel dispenser because someone else touched it with the wet water. And other people just wash and they seem to be very comfortable just washing with water on your hands, with water on the keli. And what's the halacha l'maisa? So as our derech ways is, I would like to try to reduce all these questions to one simple yisoid, or maybe understanding of Netilas Yodayim, and then you'll see, as we often see, Eilu ve'eilu divrei Elokim chayim. Let's talk tachlis. Let's say this kais has water on the handle, and I touch it. So what's the problem? What are you so nervous? What's wrong with this water on my hand? You'll say, what do you mean? If there's water on my hand, and I wash over the water, so the water on my hand is a chatzitza for Netilas Yodayim, right? If there's water on my hand and I wash over my hand, so the water on my hand is a chatzitza for Netilas Yodayim. But that's senseless, because a liquid is not a chatzitza. I'll give you a better mashal. Let's say you make kiddush, and then you go right away to wash. So the halacha, if the wine did not yet dry on your hand, it's not sticky, it's still moist, you could wash over the wine, because a liquid is not a chatzitza for Netilas Yodayim. So certainly water is not a chatzitza. So why do you have to wash, why do you have to dry the water off your hand? And certainly why do you have to dry the keli or the faucet? I'll say, and the truth is I can get a better argument. For Noshim, there's a tefillah deraisa. And look, we never heard that you have to, if you go from the shower to the mikveh, you have to dry in between. Water is not a chatzitza. You'll say, I know the problem, because the water is tamei. If I touch it, it's tamei. But that's not true, pashtus, because if I touch bread before I wash, I don't make the bread tamei. And the truth is, this word tumah is misused, because when you're talking on a regular Netilas Yodayim, it's not a question of tumah like tumas meis. Varaya, we don't use a mikvah, we use a revius, we use mayim that are shu'uvim. And b'chlal, it's not a tumah v'tahara issue. So what we need again is a yisai to understand why Netilas Yodayim is needed, how it works, and then we'll see yes or no regarding the moist hands. One thing we know, for Netilas Yodayim, you need a revius and no more miyikadadin. It's a mishnah in the beginning of Yodayim, a revius is enough. Now some people, they use 3 or 4 cups to wash their hands, and you wonder, do you have to use that much? So let me tell you, Dvarim Pshutim. A revius is a small fraction of a washing cup. Now this happens to be a pretty small cup. I've seen washing cups in Eretz Yisrael, they have 30 ounces. 30 ounces is close, it could be, according to Rav Chaim Na, 10 revius. And let me explain. Rav Chaim Na was the first that was famous with shiurim, and he made the cheshbon that a revius of water is 86 cc, cubic centimeters. Now in America, we go with ounces, it's 2.9 ounces. Moshe held 3.3. Okay, the Chazon Ish held a lot more, 150 cubic centimeters, which is 5.1 ounces. Now it's interesting, Rav Chaim Na said, Avada, you have to have my share, 86 cc, because Kais is Gematria, 86. It's a raya. So when the Chazon Ish had his share 150, his Talmud and Shvaga, the disciple, said, the Chazon Ish is right, because Kais Hagun is Gematria 156. See, the Kais or Kais Hagun. But at the end of the day, let me tell you, this standard cold hot cup is 8 ounces. Okay? Some of them are 10, but this is 8. This has, according to Rav Chaim Na, more than 2 reviusin. And this cup probably has around 20 ounces. But the emphasis is all you need is a revius. Now, how did they wash both hands with a revius? Teretz is when you used to have to draw the water from the well, and it was a tircha, you learned how to do it. If you ever had a blackout in camp and there's no running water because there's no electricity, you learn how to use water sparingly. Now, so what am I driving at? And here we come to the, I don't know the right word, the chiddush, the patent, and maybe the word choik. The choik of Netilas Yodayim is the following. You take a revius of water and you pour it on your right hand. You don't use revius. You can't use revius on one hand. You have to have both hands. So here we come to a pliya, because since you're washing with the revius and it goes onto the hand, the right hand becomes tahor because you're using a revius. That's the chiddush of Netilas Yodayim. But the problem is that the water becomes tamei. I would say that the choik of Netilas Yodayim is it's metayar tameim umetayar tahirim. It's metayar your hand, but the water is now tamei. And that's the Mishnah in Yodayim Perik Beis Mishnah Gimel Yodayim mitames umetaros. But if you finish the netila and wash what's called in Mishnayos terms mayim shniyim, then not only are your hands tar, the water is tar. And this, look at the Mishnah Berurah in the beginning, Hakdama to Siman Kuf Samach Beis, and like I say, savor the flavor. He gives you the understanding of Netilas Yodayim. The Shvicha Rishona makes your hands tar, but the water is tamei. The second Shvicha makes the water tar as well. Now, the emes of the Paiskim Rishonim use a lashon that a revius of water is like a mikveh. The Mishnah Berurah, the Shulchan Aruch, in our Siman Kuf Samach Beis Siv Dalet, he says washing kalach is like a tefillah, but you have to do it right. If you use less than a revius, you're halfway there. Your hands are tar, but the water is tamei. Now, the emes is, today we use much more than a revius, especially even on one hand more than a revius. And the ikar din, if someone washes his right hand with a revius and washes the left hand with a revius, he's yaitza. Dry it and eskazun. The Ravid sheet is you always have to have mayim shniyim. Okay, but halacha, if you have a revius, you're good to go with one shvicha. Now, Rabbi, let's talk tachlis. Let's say my hand is wet from water, or the shissel, the cup, is wet from water. Who cares? And the emes is, our Paisik Mishnah Berurah basically holds there's no problem if the hands are wet, or the shissel is wet, or the faucet is wet. His only problem is the following. Now, since I want you to enjoy as much as I did, I brought a keli, so you could all see and watch why the Mishnah Berurah only has one problem. And it's no confusion. For those that are listening and not watching, take your own kais. But let's say you fill up the kais, it goes in your right hand, put in your left hand. Now let's say you have water on your right hand. Right? What's the problem? When you wash over it, it washes it off. Says the Mishnah, I'll tell you what the problem is. When you wash your right hand, less than a revius. Okay? Now, let's freeze my right hand. What's the status of my right hand? My hand is tar, water is tamei. Okay? Then I grab the keli and wash my left hand. Freeze the left hand. What's the status of the left hand? The yad is tar and the water is tamei. Then I grab the keli and wash the right hand. So I'm doing great. My right hand got a check. It was washed perfectly. Here's the problem. When I grab the handle to wash the left hand, what is on this handle? Mayim tmeim. So now my perfectly washed hand touches mayim tmeim. And that we'll soon see. Once you have mayim tmeim going back on your hands when the hands are wet, it passes the netila. So the Mishnah Berurah says, you got a problem. If, Zok the Mishnah Berurah, you use a revius on each hand, or you wash the right hand twice, and like halacha, and wash the left hand twice, you're perfect. But if you're a shtickle modna mensch, and you use less than a revius, and you alternate, which you're not really supposed to, that's negel vasser. But if you do both of those, then you have a problem of the hand that was tar becoming tummy. Now I want to give you a heads up. If you look at the Mishnah Berurah inside, you will see his problem is a step before I told you. Do you know why? because Mr. Bura is based on the Rav Shulchan Aruch, and the Rav talks about a keli with one handle, like they used to make. Then your problem is a step before. So I'm being generous with our case of 2 handles. When do you have the problem? At the very end of the Netila. So Mr. Bura says there's one problem, very logical. When the handle has mayim tmeim from the other hand, and your fully washed kosher hand touches the mayim tmeim, there goes the Netila. And as we'll soon see, when you have a hand that's washed perfectly, and someone else touches it, or your other hand that didn't wash touches it, or mayim tmeim touches it, then you have to start again. In fact, you have to dry your hands first, because you can't wash on tamei water. Now, you look at Mr. Bura and see if you cut in Memtes, you'll see exactly what I said, but it's a step earlier, because you only had one handle. Now, but Mr. Bura does say, so no problem. If you want to avoid this, wash either revius, or wash twice on the right, and twice on the left. Okay. If you want to be a lamdin, a different eitzah, and I saw this with my own eyes, you have a keli that has 3 handles. And if you do it right, you could avoid the problem. Actually, it's not so, there's another eitzah more practical. And let's say, Taka, the handle that you have to touch with your right hand is wet. Not the whole handle. Let's say the top of it. So try to find a place that's dry. But if you have any doubt that I'm saying is right, and here you see where the Mr. Bura, quote, flexes his muscle, and you see his braid to plates in the Chatzitza, on this Mr. Bura, if cotton mem aleph, he quotes Gedolei HaPoskim. He quotes the Pischei Tshuva, that's the Dayan in Vilna, Isserlin, written 150 years ago, which is really based on the Yodayim. And he quotes the Shulchan Shloimer, Mira, who lived 250 years ago. And he says, these Gedolim have another problem. And they say that if the kais is wet, and then you pick it up with your hand, that's the problem. Just merely touching water on the handle with tamei hands. Why? Obviously, they felt that when my hand touches water on the handle, what do I do to that water? I make the water tamei. So what, I have to come on to my own water? So you have these Gedolei Olam that said that if the kai's handle is wet and I touch that water, the water becomes tamei. So it's interesting, he quotes big poskim, the Shulchan Yodayim, Shulchan Shloimer, Tshuva, says the Mishnah, I don't understand. If the water is on the handle of the kais, and it's not part of the netila, it doesn't become tamei. If I touch water before I eat, before I wash, does the water become tamei? Well, soon see, says the Mishnah Bura, if I stick my hand into the kais that has water and I touch it by mistake, the water is not tamei. When does water become mayim tmeim? When it's after a netila. Zok the Mishnah Bura, so what are they worried about? Let there be water on your hands or the handle, as long as it's not mayim tmeim after a netila. What's the problem? And he writes, I used a diuk, and there was so much ian that he put into this Mishnah Bura. You have to learn it. You see, it's incredible. But Mishnah Bura holds mayim tmeim is only the remains of my netila. Now let me give you a heintige mashal. Those who that my age still remember, they used to have they had an outbreak, an epidemic of hepatitis. So they took a pigeon, put it on the person, and that took out the poison. The pigeon died, and the person lived. Do you understand it, right? The pigeon took out the tummy, the tumor, the poison. The Mishnah Bura holds the only mayim tmeim is when I wash on my right hand lamashal, the water becomes mayim tmeim from the netila. But water on my hands or keli before the netila is not mayim tmeim. So again, he flexes his muscle. He argues on Chayodam, Pischei Tshuva, and the Shulchan Shloimer. But he says, what should I do? I found the Rav Shulchan Aruch in Kuf Samach Beis Yud Gimel. He also quotes the Machzah Shekel, and the Rav Mamish spells it out. If the handle, the oizen, is wet with water, no problem. The only mayim tmeim is the remains of a netila after you washed. And then the Rav adds in parentheses, and this is interesting, even if he has water on his hands before he washes, don't worry about it. It's not mayim tmeim. Now I believe this is why the Mishnah Berurah rejected the Shulchan Shloima, Hayodam, and Pischei Tshuva, because he had a Rav Shulchan Aruch, a Masa Shekel, and he mentions also, early before all of them, was the Shita of the Divrei Chamudais, and basically he feels comfortable to say that there's no problem. Now, the Mishnah Berurah again says the only problem is if you have mayim tmeim that was used during a netila. Now, I want to make another point, and then we'll apply this lemaisa. Mishnah Berurah says that if you, in the worst scenario, you touch with your kosher right hand the mayim tmeim on the handle from the netila, you have to dry your hands and start again. In the worst scenario, which we all agree. Now, Kana ben Shoyal, okay, let's say my netila became no good. It's mayim tmeim. Good. I'm not intimidated by the mayim tmeim. What do I do every time I wash if I have mayim tmeim on my hand? I wash over, right? Mayim rishonim is tummy, mayim shnim is matayr. So why is Mishnah Berurah say you have to dry your hand? So this is based on a Shulchan Aruch Kuf Samach Beis Siv Dalid, where the Machaber says you wash one hand and you touched it with the other hand, you have to dry it first and start again. Why? Very, very pashut. Because when does mayim shni, what's the chayk of mayim shniyim? It works on mayim rishonim that came from the netila. Typical, first and second. Here, you may have an outside problem. Someone touched your hand. That's not part of the netila. If there's mayim tmeim that's not part of the netila, you have to start again. So that's the point we're going to use. But it's not chatzitza issue. The light the Mishnah Berurah our paisik based on Gedolei HaPaiskim, it's only a problem when you wash with less than revius and you alternate, but otherwise there's no problem. Water on the hand, keli, or on the faucet. Now, but we can't forget you have a Chayodam, a Shulchan Shloima, and a Pischei Tshuva. But what's most, interesting, there's also a Rav Shulchan Aruch in the Siddur. Now let me explain. At the end of the Rav, there are Piskei Siddur, there's also Hilchas Berach Sanen, and Piskei Siddur was written after the Rav. By the Rav, after he wrote the Rav Shulchan Aruch. In Netilas Yodayim, L'Suda, Ois Vav, he says, if you have any water on your hand, make sure you dry it before you wash the Netilas Yodayim. And he gives an example. The person went to the bathroom, washed his hands, and then he wants to wash for Netilas Yodayim. Make sure your hands are dry. Now, and that's why, especially by Chassidim, the makbid to dry your hand before you wash. Now, the big question is, what's pshat? Why does the Rav and the Siddur, the Chayodam, Shulchan Shloima, Pischei Tshuva, you have to dry the hands? What's wrong with water before the netila? But of course, the bigger kasha is the Rav Esoisa. In Shulchan Aruch, he writes no problem, beferish, and the Rabbi writes it's a problem. So to answer very briefly, a lot is written about this, but the Shulchan and Lamed Gimel, Yud Gimel, and the Eretzi, the Kashglav and Aleph Lamed Hey, are machavim to the same yisoid. The Machmirim felt that if the water's on your hand and you're about to wash, so to quote the lashon of the Shulchan, beregazu, that you're starting to wash and there's water on your hand, that water becomes mei netila. Once mei netila becomes tamei, what is that called in halacha? Mayim tmeim. The Mishnah Berurah held it's random water on your hand. It's the wrong place in the wrong time, but it's not mayim from the tila. But the Machmirim held if the water's on your hand and you're about to wash, that water becomes part of the mayim of the tila. May netila, that's tamei, has to be taken off. The Rav is soisa himself, so that's not such a kasha. First of all, the Rav wrote the Siddur later, so that was his psak achron. But says the Kashglava also, it's yadua lakol, that when the Rav had a suffix, he put in parentheses. If you look in the Rav, in the Shulchan Aruch, when he says you don't have to worry about the water on your hand, he puts it in parentheses. So maybe Taka, even when he wrote the Shulchan Aruch, he wasn't certain. But no doubt about it, at the end of the day, he paskin in the Siddur, that's his Psak Achrein, that you have to dry your hands from water on it, because it becomes part of the main Netila, Mayim Rishonim concern. Now, this explains those that are Machmir, the Ksais HaShulchan writes, Yirei Hashem Medagtegim, the Kajgalava also sanctions this Chumrah, and basically, we understand why, in fact, there are those that are Machmir, again, because the Rav Psak, the Paisik Achron for the Chassidim especially, and the Rav's final Psak is to be Machmir. Now, the emes is the same is true with the water on the keli. Since you're about to wash, so then it becomes like a ma'inatila. When you touch it, that water becomes tummy. The Chazaynish in Chav Dalid, Chav Gimel Ayin Sham, extends the Chumrah to water on the faucet. Because same problem. Once the water becomes part of the natila, and your hand that is now tummy touches it, it becomes mayim tmei. Now, the paper towel dispenser is probably not a problem. We'll soon see if it's not very wet, I'm going to ask. But let me just tell you, you see the sheinkite of learning halacha properly. And you see the beauty of Eilu ve'Eilu Divrakim Chayim. Today that we use more than a revius, presumably on each hand, and we wash twice right and twice left, we understand the Mishnah Berurah holds there's no problem whatsoever. The only problem could be if you wash in a very unusual way. And the Mishnah Berurah is based on Gedolei HaPoskim. Okay, the Rav is off his list, but again, you see, Tataka Chassidim HaMachmeh, that's based on the Rav's Psak. Probably Bnei Yeshiva that HaMachmeh is based on the Chayodam. Don't forget the Chayodam was the Mechutin of the Gra, the Talmud of the Gra. Svardim, I saw the Kaf HaChaim and Tzidkon Chav Zayin says that Svardim should be Machmir, even though the emes is the Ben Ish Chai, who lived before the Kaf HaChaim. And Shmini Yud Zayin quotes the Chesed Lalofim, that's the Pele Yoyitz, that Mi'ikid Din, you don't have to worry about water on your hands. Like the Mishnah Berurah wrote, like the earlier Poskim wrote. Now, what you do Lamaisa, follow your minute. But I would say one thing, if there's a line waiting to wash as quick as possible. Some people get, there's a long line waiting for Shal Shuddas to wash, and they're drying this and drying that. It's like mind of the story, there's this fellow's waiting for Shabbos to finish, and someone says, it's even though bein a tam davmar, what's your problem? So you have to wait, a safik minafshay. So he goes, yeah, but you have to wait, a safik minafshay, but not nafshay misafik. You're going to wait until, the pell's washing and drying and doing and again. So, don't worry so much. There's definitely what to be saimach on. Each could follow his minig. Now to apply this more specifically, and shemus chinavshem, everything fits in beautifully. First of all, an ounce of prevention is always in place. When at home, it's very kedai to keep the kais not in the sink. Keep the kais on the counter or a hook special that's made for the cup. Reason is pashut, because if it's not in the sink, typically the handles are dry. So you have no problem. You don't have to dry the handles, you pick it up, you wash twice the right, twice the left, and there's no shayah l'chaladeyis. The problem is you pick up the cup from the sink that's wet, then you have this machlaikis, should you dry it or not. Also, avoid washing with the cup that has no handle. Because as we'll see, let's say you wash the right hand, and you did a great job twice with the revius, two revius in. But then you have to put the kais, into the other hand to wash the left hand. So the left hand has to put the kais into the right hand. Now this right hand is perfect, but if there's no handle, it's very easy that the right hand that's perfectly kosher touch the left hand. That will soon say mechaber shulchan aruch. Then the right hand's netila is puzzle, and you have to dry over the whole hand. So if you have two handles, okay, three, I'm not going to say you have to have three, but two is advisable. Even one, you get into the problem that the Mishnah Berurah was concerned about. Now also, when we say the problem is when the hand is wet, I mean wet lahalocha. Not there's some type of microscopic, moisture. Lahalocha wet means teifeach al manas latfiach, which means that I touch the water, now my hand has water, I put it on the table, and I see the water on the table. The water is so wet, it's transferable. It goes onto my hand, and I put it on the table, and the table is wet. Typically, you have just moisture, that is not amanas latfiach, it wouldn't be a problem. So if there's a lot of water or water amanas latfiach, then we begin the shaila mishdebura versus the Rav and the Siddur. I once saw someone that came to the sink, picked up the kais, and put on the faucet and washed off both handles. Instead of drying the handles, he washed off the right handle, the left handle, and then he started washing. I didn't ask him what his cheshbon was. I imagine he felt that drying the handle takes too long. So as terech tzibura, he rinsed off the handles. So I don't know if that's quicker or not, but let's assume he's right, it's quicker. He didn't gain much. Because the only thing he gained was that if there's mayim tmeim on the handle, then rinsing helps. Now, let me explain that. Because one thing I must tell you, that even the Mishnah that's big, the big makel, if you have somehow mayim tmeim on the handle, halachic mayim tmeim, that's a problem. Now, where do you have mayim tmeim on the handle? So I'll tell you. If you have a big oilam, and amongst the big oilam there are children, and some people that are not very learned, and they don't wash kaloch. They wash with less than a revi'ah zeichel l'chorban because they're more worried about the food than the washing. And let's say you wash with less than a revi'ah and doesn't go on the whole hand. And you don't do a better job the second time. So all that water is mayim tmeim. That the Mishnah doesn't argue on. If you have mayim tmeim on the handle from the fellow before you that washed improperly and didn't allow the mayim shniyim to mataya the mayim rishonim, then you have a problem of the water. Now, so who said you have to be chayshish for that? Yidna b'nei Torah. Today we use a revi'us on one hand, but let's say you have mayim tmeim and a chanami. So one pasuk told me that's maybe you have to add if there's mayim tmeim. But now, if the problem would only be mayim tmeim on the handle, then rinsing would work. But most of the problems that if the handle is wet and you touch it, you make the water on the handle wet, the concern of the Shulchan Shloim, Chayodam, Bischei Tshuva, or the concern of the Rab that water on the hand is a problem, so you're not getting away washing the handle. Because why? You wash the handle, now it's perfect. But the water on the handle is like regular water, that's a problem according to most poskim. So you only gain one of the concerns, so it's better to dry the handle if necessary. In camp, we always have the shayla, like they come from sports and they're having lunch or supper, and they're pretty fashvitzed. Do you have to rinse off the sweat on your hand before you wash for bread? So the emes is, even in Hilchos Tefillah we find that if sweat is not thick, if it's just moist, it's like any other moisture that you wash off and you don't have to dry it. Even wine is not a problem, certainly not sweat. Now, what used to be a problem today is a little easier, but if you remember, there was a long line waiting to wash B'Shal Shudis, and finally you got your turn to wash, and you dried your hands in the big shul towel that 138 people dried before you, and you almost drowned in the towel, in the Shiloh on Shabbos of Chatzitza. So the emes is that a problem? Let's assume that the towel is amanas latviach. There's a Shiloh of schita. So let me read you Mechaba and tell me what you think. Kuf Samach Bei Siv Ches. Mechaba says a person washed and he had no paper towel, so he dried his hands on the wall. He shouldn't touch the water on the wall because that would be mayim tmeim. Now, zokt and therefore that's matama your hands. Kommt again the divrei chamudais in Chul and Perik Ches Siman Pei Hey. And he says, this halach in Shulchan Aruch is based on a Beferish Mishnah. He says, that's because you dried your hands on a wall like a derech netila. If you dry your hands into a towel like a derech netila, don't worry about the water content in the towel. It's a chiluk, netila versus on the wall. The Magen Avram says, tzarich iyan minolin ha, lakach ein lismech al zeh. If there's a problem of the water, even in a towel, don't use that towel. Now, Lamais, the Lavush, and the Taz explain the Shita of the Divrei Chamudais. Divrei Chamudais is one of the Kadmoinim. But at the end of the day, Machta Shekel says, be careful not to use a towel that's Tefeach Hamanas Latfiach. But then he adds for us priceless words. He says, especially in a big place, Some people wash improperly with less than a revius and don't use mayim tmeim, mayim shniyim. So your towel could have bona fide mayim tmeim. And he's concerned, what I told you, you can have those people that don't wash properly. I don't want to quote this, but the Pri Megadim in Mishplei Sahav Siv Katan Zayin, he says, when you learn Shulchan Aruch and you see the details, I worry, he says, Adam Beinini, maybe I never washed properly in my lifetime. Now this wasn't Nervin. This is what's called knowledge. He knew how to wash. Now I hope that this is not accurate. But Lamaisa, there is at least what I saw the Kajiglav refers to as a Safak HaMotzui, that some, in a big Mokum Tziburi, some people wash them properly. So on your towel, unless you have Ruach HaKodesh, if it's Amaras Latfiach, there's a problem that maybe the water would be Mayim Tamei. Now again, typically, if I wash with a Revius, or two Revius, and I dry it, so what's in the towel? Mayim Ksherim, no problem. It's only if people that washed improperly deposited their Mayim Tmeim onto the towel. Now, this is on the Maisa, Avada B'di'eved, you could be Mekel, it's only a Safek Drabanan, Ravozna, in the Tshuva, in Chelik Zayin, Siman Chav, he says a very practical Hachra. He says, if at home, so it's only a small oila, it's probably not a Maslat Fiach, and also people at home are washing, properly. In a Makam Tziburi, where there's a lot of people, and it's probably very wet, and also there's a miyut of people that wash, that make a mayim tmeim, you should not use that towel. It's interesting, the Chazinish and Chafei Yud Beis is make across the board, so certainly b'di'evet, if you use a towel that's wet, don't worry. What I always wondered about, those that are machmir, like the Rav and the Siddur, and they dry their hand before they wash. So there is a concern from a different angle. The Magen Avraham, Mishtabur, and Simon Kuf Nun Ches both quote a Tashbitz Katan, one of the Rishonim, that don't dry your hands in your begadim. Hamanage yada bechalukai is kash l'shikcha. Now this is a legitimate one that says in the Paiskim. So the question is, when you dry your hands to be yaitza the Rav's chumrah, not to have wet hands, is that a problem of kash l'shikcha? So it's very hard to speculate in Dvarim HaNistarim, but it's possible to say, first of all, the Pri Megadim already says, in Kuf Nun Ches Yud Aleph, that the only problem is chalukai, which is typically a shirt, maybe a jacket is not a problem. Some say only negel vasser is the problem. Okay, but what could be, and this is logical, could be it's only menagev, a real, a niguv means after you wash your hands, you dry them. This is more like a chumrah, maybe it's not included. I looked around, I couldn't find the place to discuss it, so we could say that Poik Chazim, Mayamad Debar, the Olam does do it in their jacket, whatever. You could put together these stud lahakol, hopefully it's okay. Rav Moshe writes the klal in these Dvarim HaNistarim, Al Pisoid, Ein L'chabel L'chadushay. It says like this, so you don't have to be worried if once it's slightly different, it's not bechlal. That's why he's makel by canned eggs versus cracked eggs. So maybe we could say Chalukah is dafka, and Netilas Yodayim is dafka, and there's only a chumrah. I hope that's correct. Interesting question. Someone asked me years ago, but it came back to me because I think it fits in beautifully this year. He's a malamed for younger children, and he has 40 children in a primary class. It comes time for lunch. They all have to wash, and if they're going to wash themselves, they won't do a good job. He's going to wash each individually. It'll take too long. So he wanted to know if he could line up all the boys by a big sink that they have in the yeshiva, and he washes one after the other. Line them up, get together close as possible so he could fit them all in, and 1 and 2 times he washes 40 boys. So the emes is, as long as he's pouring, as long as it's a koyach gavra, and he has enough water, you can use a big shissel, you can use a big keli, it doesn't have to be a washing cup, as long as it has a halach of a keli. So I'm not worried about the keli, and it's koyach gavra, but the problem, which is very, very prevalent, if you're washing Yossi is touching Chaim. Chaim was not yet washed. So after he finished Yossi and his hands are touching Chaim before Chaim was washed, so you have the halach in Shulchan Aruch that if someone that didn't wash touched someone that washed, even he washed with the revius, you have to dry the end and start again. But when you learn halacha, you'll see that's not the case. In Kuf Samach Bey Siv Dalid, the Mechaber says, if you wash both hands together, some people want to use a revius on both hands, So they have only revius, they have someone wash them, both hands together. So even though the hands are touching, and presumably one gets washed first, makes no chilik. If you noitel beis yodayim ka'achas, it's like one long netila. And you look at the end of the netila, and it's kosher. The Shulchan Aruch continues, afilu dalar hei shenich yodayim zeh b'tzad zeh, or zeh al gabi zeh, and you wash them all, it's no problem if one's touching the other. So Takasu in the Sefer Michlal Yoifi, who points this out, loiti, the Shulchan Aruch, if the Rabbi is washing and they're all taka as one netila, then enochanami, you don't have to worry if one touches the other. We have a question, sometimes a person finally fills up the kais, and by mistake he's holding to grasp the kais, his finger by mistake or his hand by mistake goes into the water that was sink water that's perfect. But now the problem is, if his tamei hand touches the water, could he use that water to matire his hand? So we would think, oh, now it's mayim tmeim. That's not true. Because as we said, mayim tmeim has a halachic definition, the remnants of the netila. If your hands touches water before you wash, that's not mayim tmeim. You touch bread, it's not tamei, it's not the end of tumah. And who says it's not me? The Ramah in Kuf Samach Yud Aleph, quoting a Trumas Hadeshin and Raishon Tes, that if it's not part of the netila, if it's before the netila, there is no problem of the water. And the Trumas Hadeshin explains, because water b'shas netila becomes tamei. Water before the netila is not tamei. And Rabbi say this is one of the makaris of the Mishnah Brura that says water on the hand from before the netila, from the bathroom, is not a problem. Because it's mamish this halacha. It's not nemei netila, it's mayim before. Now, the only issue I would mention, if someone lets him notice he has on his finger, he has a chatzitza, something sticky. So let me stick it into the kais, wash off the chatzitza, dry off the chatzitza, and then I'll wash. That passels the water, but for a different reason. Not because of tamei, because malach is done. So I would use, it's not tamei, it is passel. So that's a different halach. Question, sometimes you have a leil sederis negeya, where you want to bring to the table, someone should wash for the matzah or for the karpas. Well, let's say you have the grandparents at home. I was told the Bachram, bring your grandparents to wash by the table, even a regular Shabbos, keep it off, keep it aim. It's beautiful. The question is, let's say after they washed, in the shissel, there's mayim tmeim, and you touched it by mistake during the Suda. You forgot to take it away till later. In other words, you washed your hands, it's perfectly clean, during the Suda, and you touched in the shissel, in the receptacle, water from the Netilas Yodayim. Do you have to wash again during the Suda? Did it pass with the Netila? So the emphasis, the Rav says in Sif Yud, afilu be'emtza Suda, if you touch mayim tmeim, you have to wash again. Mayim tmeim is mayim tmeim. The only thing I'm going to tell you is that if the grandparent, whoever washed kalocha with revius on each hand, so then that was mayim tmeim. You have nothing to worry about. Now, I only wondered if you have let's say a big outdoor netilas yadayim, let's say by a sukkah, you have a big keli that they have. So some of it is mayim tmeim and some is mayim tahirim. And I touched that water. So Ramshik feels that you go basaroiv. Even though tumah is not bottle beroiv, this is not tumah. This is Netilas Yodayim water. Okay. Lamaisa, there are those that are machem even by that, and they hold that there is no bittul. So that's an issue when you have a lot water which might have mayim tmeim. But if you bring to a person to wash, and he washed kalacha, revius on each hand, which again is very easy today, this just has, probably 7 revius in, then there's no mayim tmeim. So nothing to worry about in the first place. A revius of water never becomes a problem. So somebody asked me, what he thought, why do you have to have so much water? Let Ruvain wash with the revius, and let Shimon use the same water. It's not mayim tmeim. Tell him you're right. It's not mayim tmeim, but it's a beferish mishnah called mayim psulim, and that's pashut. Now, this is clear that lamaisa, the only problem be'ikr is the mayim that remains from a netila. Question: someone washed kalacha and he's making the bracha, and someone else washed and reached out to get a paper towel, and water from the person that's reaching out to get the paper towel dripped onto the person that finished washing. Is that a problem? So the answer is, if your water is like my water, that's mayim tahirim, what's the problem? Because halacha is, let's say, a better question. Let's say I wash kalacha, and you wash kalacha, and both reaching out to get a paper towel, and we touch each other. Is that a problem? Not. Two tahirim touch is fine. The only problem is if a yad tameh touches a yad tar, when it's still wet, that is. But if two people tahirim touch one the other, that would not be a problem. If lamaisa, in a strange scenario, someone washed only mayim rishonim, and somehow his water, the shirayim of his mayim pain went onto your hand after you washed perfectly, then you have a serious problem, and you have to dry the hands and wash over. So the only basic problem would be, again, if you have mayim tmeim, real halachic mayim tmeim. Now I must mention halacha because I think it's very negel, and I wonder if the Olam is aware of this. The halacha in Shulchan Aruch, which is really part of a different shir, but in Yaneinu, in Kuf Samach Daled Beis, person that goes to the bathroom or diapers a baby, Bekitza, he has now his hands became tamei lahalacha, went to the Beis HaKisei, diaper the baby, he has to wash a new Netilas Yodayim. The truth is, there are more paskins, he has to wash and make a bracha on the new Netila. Azayvait. Okay, the Mishnah Berurah quotes the paiskim that are mekel, we don't make a new bracha. But definitely, if a person went to the Beis HaKisei, or diaper the baby, or any type of touching a makam mechusa, he has to wash over. Now, the halacha be'emes mi'ikir din, Yisrael Kedoshim, many people after Beis HaKisei, they come out, they wash the hands once, and without a keli, and they say Ashiyotza. That's fine. Magen Avram and Sif Daled, Sif Katan Yud Ches says, after the Beis HaKisei, you don't need 3 times. Certainly not a keli. Okay, some Yisrael Kedoshim use a keli and wash 3 times, say Rugin, like Netilas Yodayim, Elu ve'elu. My only point is, for both, how now that you have a chiyuv Netilas Yodayim, not just Ashiyotza, you have Netilas Yodayim. What you have to do after you come out of the Beis HaKisei is wash kalacha. You can't just be like I do every time after the bathroom, once and once without a keli and say Ashiyotza. That's good for Ashiyotza, but now you have a chiyuv Netila. And let's say I wash Sirugin 3 times, now I shouldn't do that. It'd be better to do wash twice on the right, twice on the left. You want to do 3 times like Tziminik. Afterwards, wash a 3rd time in each hand. The point is, after a regular bathroom visit, if you make only once on each hand without a keli, that's okay. But after a bathroom visit during a Suda, you have to have a new chiyuv Netila, almost with a bracha, except Mishnah Berurah's mekel, there's no bracha. And now we have Achrin Chav of the last group of questions. It should be a shared delight how halacha plays it out in this respect as well. Let's say I washed a Netila kalacha. Revius, 2 revius, I am perfect. The problem is, before I dried my hands, either my tamei hand touched my right hand, I'd say only wash the right hand, my left touched the right, or I washed both hands and someone that didn't wash at all touched my hand when it's wet. Now, do I have to dry my hands or just wash again? This also could be negeya. You accidentally poured on your hand, you wanted to pour a lot, and somehow only a drop came out. So it's basically, you didn't wash the whole hand. Do I have to dry it and then start again? Or just, what's your problem? Just wash over it. So one thing is certain. The fact that there's water on your hand is not a chatzitza issue. There's no chatzitza in this context. What is the problem? What do you mean, what's the problem? Now, even though my right hand was perfectly tahor, I washed with 2 revius, but my left hand touched it. Or someone else touched it. So now what do I have on my hand? The chayra, mayim tmeim. The water that was tahor was touched by someone that made it tamei. So the chayra I should have to dry it. But wait a second, I'm not intimidated by this. I'm not scared of mayim tmeim. What do we do every time we wash? Once with let's say less than revius, we have mayim shniyim. So why can't I just take my mayim shniyim and wash over? Why should I have to dry my hands? But this is not true, as we said earlier. And this is Kuf Samach Beis Siv Dalid, that if you washed once Mayim Rishonim, that Mayim Tmeim, the second time does the trick. That's the Choyk of Netilas Yodayim. But here, what's the story? You washed twice with 2 revius, and you're a big tzaddik. But now, mi bachutz, an external problem, was matama your hands. That's not Mayim Tmeim of Netilas Yodayim. That's an external problem. And Zok the Mechaba, like Mr. Burr said earlier, you have to dry your hands first and then wash again. The Mr. Burr does add, the Shulchan Aruch does add, the same is true if someone else from outside touched your hand, it's the same problem. So in cases when your hand became tamei either from the other hand or from outside, there is a chiyuv to dry your hands first. This is, Mechaba makes it in the two stories, because it really is 2 stories, but it's the same idea. Now comes again the Yam Shlomo with the most brilliant analysis. And he says, and this is Yam Shlomo, in the Chulin, Perek Ches, Siman Am Gimel, typically the Yam Shlomo was a machmir, but here it's a big makel. And he says, wait a minute. If you wash with the revius on your hand, okay? Let's talk in a simple case. You wash with the revius on your right hand, okay? Visual aid. Now, my right hand is very kosher. But the left hand, when I was shifting the kais, touched my right hand. Your takit's tummy. But what level of tumah is there? Just 1 tumah. So why can't another revius wash off Mayim Tmeim? The Mishnah says you have to dry your hand first. He says, beautiful. He says, that's if you washed with less than a revius, and then you need the Mayim Shniyim to mimitaya the Mayim Tmeim, and then after you did all that, you touched it with your tummy left hand. So you have what he calls a tumal tumasai, a double tumah. Oivei. Who said another washing takes off double tumah? But in the case that you wash with the revius, so let's see, your hand is perfectly tar. The water's tar. What happens? Someone's matame, the water on your hand. So it's not the end of the world. What do you do if you have Mayim Tmeim on your hands? Up the Yam Shlomo, wash off again. So Yam Shlomo says the only time you have to dry your hands if you washed originally with less than a revius, which is very rare. And the Rav in Sif Tes and the Aruch HaShulchan accept the Yam Shlomo. However, the Mechaba, the Ramah, doesn't seem to make such a chilik. The Chazon Ish strongly, in Chav Dal, Chav Gimel, strongly rejects this. And I think the Hezbollah Pasha Zil Basar Taima. The problem is not 2 tumah or 1 tumah. The problem is it's a tumah doesn't respond to Mayim Shniyim. This is a tumah mi bachutz. So who cares how much compounded tumah there is? And Tak in the Mishnah Berurah in Sif Kat and Memches quotes both shitas. I guess it leaves it to us to be machriya. But Lamaisa, what's interesting is the same Mishnah Berurah discusses what seems to be a similar shaila, but there he's machmir and doesn't bring any makilim. In fact, in the bottom he says could be Yam Shlomo is even moida, and that is, listen to this: I washed my hands with 2 revius, perfectly kosher. Someone else touched my kosher hand. There, the Mishnah Berurah and the Chatzitza quotes Derech HaChai and Prima Godim. That case, even the Yam Shlomo hold you have to dry your hands. Kana ben Shel, what's the chilik? Maybe the chilik is beautiful. If you touch one hand to the other during the netila, so you could hope it's a part of the netila. But someone comes out from nowhere and touches your hand, that's totally an external problem. That it passes the netila and the water, and it does not respond to Mayim Shniyim. And tak is interesting, Mr. Berurah and Sif Kat and Memhei, that when someone else touches you, you have to wash over. He just said you have to dry your hands. He doesn't even mention the Yam Shlomo. So that's interesting to keep in mind. But don't forget, even if the left hand touched the right hand, I can't say it's perfectly mutter to just wash over it. We have 2 days. Assume and this is a pretty common case, that let's say you have the one hand that you wash, let's say both hands, and one hand was touched by someone from outside. Do you have to wash both hands or only one hand? So the emes is, this case, there's no reason to wash both hands. And Taka the Rav and the Siddur and Siv Gimel says this aside. If indeed someone touched the right hand, so the right hand is tummy. It's not a double or nothing package. Nothing to worry about with the other hand. So Taka, dry the other hand, the right hand, and wash it over. Now, assume someone touched his right hand that was tar with his left hand. Okay, so he has to wash over. That's Macham Shechnar. Does he have to rinse the water that's on his left hand before he washes it? Or just ignore it and wash over it? Beautiful ha'ara. This is telling the Machlaikis, Mishnah Berurah and the Rav. Because this is not mayim tmeim. This is water from his right hand that was tar. So it's regular random water. So like the Mishnah Berurah, you could just rinse it off, and like other places, you have to dry like all the water on your hands. Another good news, as I told you earlier, if one hand, if your hands that are tar touch someone else's hands as tar, that's b'chalal not a problem. And last but not least, which is really gishmak, because it really puts the whole sugya in perspective. In a certain sense, you see both angles of the sugya. A person wanted to wash his whole hand. That's what he was trying to do. Unfortunately, it went out too little water, and now basically looks at his hand, only half the hand was washed. So the question is, of course he has to start again, because he didn't wash. It's not that he washed with mayim rishonim. He didn't wash the hand. We possibly have to wash not only the fingers, but the whole hand. So the question is, does he have to dry that first, which is pretty tedious, or just wash over it? So the emes says this is really a big sugya of mayim ein etila lechatzoyim. That basically, you're allowed to kasher a keli piecemeal. You have a big keli. So you want to, let's say, you're going to use a blowtorch, whatever method you use, you're allowed to do half of it, and then the other half. As long as you mataher the entire tarfus of the keli. Le'idach gisa, tefillah, you can't toivel half a body at a time. Even one hair is a chatzitza, is not kosher. So the Mishnah in Yodayim says, Netilas Yodayim is more similar to tefillah. And we paskin, that's a Gemara in Gittin, ein netila chatzoyim. So there's no doubt about it, you can't wash half the hand. Oy bazoi, maybe we'll say, so since the first shvicha was not good, so what does it become by default? L'chayra? Mayim Tameim. Then we have an eitzah of washing over it. But wait a second. It wasn't even a mayim rishonim that has the chshivas of mayim tmeim. You only wash part of your hand. It sounds like real mayim tmeim. However, and Mishnah Berurah said the Farish in this very shaila, tzarach litel michadash al kol hayad kedin etila ve'ein tzarach lenagev tchila. This very shaila, Mishnah Berurah holds you don't have to dry it, just wash it over. Why? So again, if you trust me, but you look in the Rishonim on this Mishnah, they also say that if you pour just an incomplete netila, you don't have to dry your hands. And the hezbollah is very pashut. Because this water came b'toiras netila. It's not like water from the faucet from someone else. So why can that add up to the next water? It's mayim tmeim. We always use mayim shniyim. This is not water mi bachutz. This is part of the netila. So let that add up with the new water, and that's why the Paiskim say we look at it like mayim rishonim that didn't do a perfect job but did something. The next water does a good job, and you don't have to dry your hands. What I didn't find, but maybe it's pashut, like the Rav Shechnar and the Siddur, v'siyatoi, that you have to dry off any water on your hand before you wash your hands. Water from the faucet, from the handle, do you have to wash off? Do you have to dry up this water as well? So no one seems to say it's a problem, and could be the same svara, because they all hold that water mi bachutz that came on your hand, that becomes a problem. But here, it became a netila. Since you are using it as a netila, so it comes out of Murdig Chiddush. A little bit water on your hand from the faucet, from spritzing that going on, that you have to dry. but you have water on your hand from an aborted attempt to wash mayim rishonim, it has the halachic status of mayim rishonim. Wash with revius over it, and it's kosher. Guten Tag to you. No Kaddish?
Shem Irgun should I'd like to thank Rav Smith for today's shir. After Kaddish, the Smith will say, Seekim, as a Shem Chanani, when a Kashem, Matz Kaddish, Baruch L'Zachar, they shall be here, but I'm Mishnah, Malanei, Chofetz, Manzid, Ke Yagdul, Ter V'Yadeh.
I agree. Hey.
Even water, there can't be a choiv.
I said it. Okay, it's another reason. Another reason. Okay. Not the kais. Someone told me the tap. What's a tapel? Oh, okay. I don't know. I can't tell. Oh, okay. Good. Could you tell me?
Seekum.
Okay. Just let's chaz what we learned there, Bez Hashem. First of all, we have a beautiful Torah, as we see. Everything is clear and documented, but basically, water is never a chatzitza during Netilas Yodayim. That's for sure. At most, it's mayim tmeim. Less than a revius that's washed on one's hands, the water becomes mayim tmeim. We use shniyim to metayr. That's the choik. That's the patent of Netilas Yodayim. The mayim shniyim is metayr the mayim rishonim. Today we use a revius. We wash twice. According to Mishnah Berurah, there's no reason to dry not the hands, not the keli, not the faucet, not the paper towel dispenser. Like Mishnah Berurah, all these problems are non-existent. The only concern would be if you wash less than a revius, and then the second before you could go from first to second time, one's matame the other hand, that, or the water goes on the other hand, that could be a problem, which is kamat not negel. It's only a very small chashash according to the Mishnah Berurah. And those that are mekel go to Mishnah Berurah's psak, and they don't have to dry anything. The minig of those that dry the hands before, that's based on the Rav and the Siddur, the like of the Rav in the Shulchan Aruch. The reason those that dry the keli, that's based on, again, Kadmoinim, the Shulchan Shloima, the Pischei Tshuva. The Chazon Ish was concerned about water on the faucet, so it's really a very beautiful Eilev Eilev Divrei Elokim Chayim. Prevention would be keep the keli not in the sink, keep it on the side so the handle is dry and you have no problem. Also use a keli that has two handles that avoids much of the problems. Without any handle, you're really very disadvantaged. If the water on the hand or any place is not amanas latfiach, it's not halachically existing, then you don't have to worry about that. Rinsing off the handle only helps if there's mayim tmeim, if someone washes like halacha, which again is very rare, but you really come back to the same problem of water on the hand. Washing over wine on the hand or sweaty hands, if it's still a moisture, it's still liquidy as opposed to stickiness, that's not a chatzitza. Using a wet towel, we could assume, hopefully, that there's no mayim tmei and people wash properly, but there is that suffix, a miyot hamotzi that wash improperly, and takif, the different alternative to avoid using the wet towel. The chashash that someone didn't wash kedin would make water a problem in the towel, but hopefully we don't have to worry about that, especially at home. If someone touches your hand when your hand is wet, that taka passos the netila. If someone touches the water of the Netilah before he washed it does not passel the water, Hezbollah, because before the Netilah, there is no Mayim Tmeim. The basic klal is that after basic kisa you have to wash a Netilah kalacha, not just without a keli. A Netilah where the Maisa that became puzzle, halacha you have to dry your hands, even though the Yam Shleim is mekel, but Mr. Ur does bring the other days, especially if someone else touched your kosher hand, you should have to dry your hand first and then rewash again. If one hand that washed touched someone else's hand that washed, it's not a problem. If your hands are perfectly dry, it's not a problem. And in the last halacha, if someone washed only part of the hand by mistake, he could just wash over, he doesn't have to dry his hands first. Yeah, I'm sorry.